How can you survive in minus 40 degrees when you have no central heating, no synthetic sleeping bag, and not even brick walls? Have you ever wondered why the first European settlers froze to death in their log cabins, while the indigenous people of the Great Plains felt comfortable in their dwellings made of skins and poles? The Great Plains of North America are a place where winter doesn't just arrive, it descends with the fury of an icy hammer. Winds here reach hurricane speeds, encountering no obstacles for hundreds of miles, and temperatures drop to extreme lows, turning everything alive into ice. However, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Crow Indians lived here for centuries without modern heating technology. Their secret was not to fight the cold, but to understand its nature and use the laws of physics, which they knew long before textbooks appeared. They turned their homes into complex thermodynamic machines and their clothes into perfect insulators. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how an ordinary stone, properly buried in the ground, could work better than a modern battery and save the life of an entire family on a frosty night. What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of Native American dwellings is not true? It is commonly believed that a teepee is just a tent stretched over poles that barely protects against the wind. In fact, it is a complex engineering structure that implemented a double insulation system comparable to modern double-glazed windows. The main secret of warmth was not the outer covering of bison skins, but an internal element that is often forgotten in films. This detail was called an ozon, or inner lining, and it radically changed the microclimate inside the dwelling. It was a canvas made of leather, or later fabric, which was attached to poles inside the teepee at a height of about 1.5 to 2 meters and descended to the ground. There was an air gap between the outer skin of the teepee and this inner wall. It was this air pocket that became an insurmountable barrier to the cold, working on the principle of a thermos. Cold air penetrating from outside remained in this gap and did not enter the living area. The heated air from people's bodies in the coals rose, creating a draft that pulled out smoke and stale air, but kept the heat down below. The Indians of the Great Plains understood aerodynamics on an intuitive but very deep level. The inner lining not only insulated, but also regulated the draft, preventing drafts that could blow out all the heat in minutes. If a blizzard was raging outside, the air inside the teepee remained virtually still and warm. In addition, this inner layer protected against condensation, which inevitably formed on the cold outer wall. Moisture droplets rolled down the outer skin and drained into the ground without dripping onto the sleeping areas and belongings of the inhabitants. Dryness was essential for survival, as wet clothes or bedding in the cold meant certain death. Interestingly, the height of this inner wall was calculated so that a person sitting or lying down would be completely protected from cold air currents. Heat was concentrated in the lower part of the dwelling, where people slept. This allowed a comfortable temperature to be maintained even with a minimal heat source. In winter, the space between the outer and inner walls was often filled with dry grass or straw. This created an additional layer of insulation, turning the walls of the teepee into thick, frost-proof panels. This method of insulation is reminiscent of modern frame houses with insulation inside the walls. It is important to note that installing such a system required precision and knowledge of the properties of the materials. The skins had to be tanned in a special way to remain elastic in the cold, but at the same time not let the wind through. Any gap could disrupt air circulation and render the structure useless. This technology allowed the Lakota and other tribes to roam even in the harshest winter months. They carried their warm homes with them, setting them up in a matter of hours. This gave them incredible mobility and independence from the whims of nature. Many modern tourists with high-tech tents still face the problem of condensation and cold, which the Indians solved centuries ago. Why do you think modern equipment manufacturers rarely use similar double-wall solutions? We would be very interested to hear your opinion. Please write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about a material that surpasses even modern synthetics in its properties? We are used to thinking that fur is just an animal skin, but bison fur, harvested at the right time of year, has unique characteristics. Native Americans knew that skin removed in summer and skin harvested in early winter are two completely different materials with different properties. Winter bison wool consists of a thick, dense undercoat and long, stiff guard hairs. This combination creates an air cushion that retains the animal's body heat even in the most severe frosts. Bison wool fibers are hollow inside, which significantly increases their thermal insulation properties, working on the principle of modern hollow fiber. So-called winter robes were used for sleeping blankets, skins obtained during the period when the animal's wool reached its maximum thickness. These skins underwent a complex tanning process, which made the flesh side, leather part, soft like flannel, but at the same time durable. If the skin was not tanned properly, it would become as hard as iron in the cold and would not be able to cover the sleeper. The brain tanning process used by the women of the Plains tribes preserved the natural oils in the skin. This made the blankets water repellent and resistant to decay. Such a blanket could last for years, warming several generations of a family. Indians usually slept not on the bare ground, but on multi-layered bedding made of such skins. The bottom layer was laid with the fur down to insulate from the ground, and the top layer was laid with the fur against the body to retain body heat. This created a cocoon in which the temperature remained comfortable throughout the night. One of the features of using bison skins was that they were used to cover the head. The dense fur created a microclimate where the person's breath further warmed the space under the blanket. At the same time, the natural material breathed, removing excess moisture so that the sleeper did not sweat. The hides were used not only as blankets, but also as mattresses. Willow branches or dry grass were often placed underneath them to create an additional air layer between the body and the cold ground. This was the prototype of modern foam camping mats. A good bison robe was incredibly valuable. In Native American culture, the gift of a warm blanket was considered a sign of the highest respect and care. It was literally a gift of life, guaranteeing survival in the winter cold. Interestingly, even after the appearance of wool blankets brought by traders, many Native Americans preferred traditional skins for sleeping on the coldest nights. A wool blanket could get wet and lose its properties, while greased bison hide provided reliable protection from dampness. Today, scientists confirm that the thermal insulation properties of northern animal fur are still difficult to reproduce artificially. Over millions of years of evolution, nature has created the perfect protection against the cold, and Native Americans have masterfully learned to borrow it. But what if there are not enough skins and the frost penetrates to the bone? In the next chapter, you will learn what secret source of heat the Indians used when it was impossible to build a large fire. Want to know a secret that will change your idea of how to keep warm without fire? I discovered this method while studying old ethnographic records, and it is striking in its ingenious simplicity. Native Americans used the principle of thermal inertia long before the concept appeared in physics, turning the ground beneath them into a long-lasting battery. We are talking about heated stones, but not the kind you put in a sauna. Before going to bed, a few hours before lights out, several large cobblestones were heated in a fire outside the teepee or in a central hearth. It was important to choose the right stones, river boulders that would not crack or explode from the heat. When the stones were red hot, they were carefully removed with deer antlers or wooden tongs. Then they were not simply placed nearby, but buried in the ground where people were going to sleep. To do this, a small hole was dug, the stone was placed there, and covered with a layer of dry earth. A layer of dry grass, twigs, or old skins was placed on top of this spot, and only then was the bed made. The earth acted as a heat moderator. It took the heat from the stone and gave it back very slowly in doses throughout the night. If you put a hot stone simply at your feet, it will cool down in an hour or two, and by morning the cold will return. A buried stone, on the other hand, heated the ground around it, creating a large warm area. The sleeping person felt a soft, enveloping warmth coming from below, which is physiologically the most effective way to keep warm. This method was called an earth stove. It was completely safe. There was no risk of the coals falling on fur blankets and causing a fire while everyone was asleep. In addition, there was no smoke that could accumulate in a tightly closed winter dwelling. Such accumulators were often made for children and the elderly, whose thermoregulation is weaker. A warm stone in the ground could retain heat for up to 6 to 8 hours, which was enough for the coldest part of the night. In the morning, the ground in this place was still warm. Sometimes during particularly severe frosts, the stones were wrapped in pieces of raw leather or thick fabric and placed directly in the bed at the feet. But the method of burying them was considered more reliable and provided more even heat. This solution allowed people to sleep warm even when the fire in the hut had long since gone out. Saving firewood in winter was critically important, as finding dry wood under the snow was difficult and energy-intensive. Using the heat capacity of stone and the insulating properties of earth is an example of the highest level of adaptation to the environment. It is a technology that requires no resources other than knowledge. Don't forget to like this if you are also amazed by the ingenuity of the ancient masters of survival. What if I showed you a time machine that would transport you to an Iroquois longhouse in the middle of winter? Unlike the nomadic tribes of the plains, the Iroquois in the northeast built huge stationary dwellings resembling dormitories. Winters in these parts were long, wet, and harsh, and a simple hut would not have protected people from the cold. Longhouses served as homes, fortresses, and heat reservoirs all at once. They could be 30 or even 60 meters long, resembling wooden ships placed on land. But how could such a huge structure be heated without pipes and radiators? This question seems complicated when viewed through the eyes of a modern person, but for the Iroquois, the answer was obvious, and based on observations of nature and the human body, they understood that it was not the walls or the roof that created heat, but the people living inside. Therefore, the secret lay in collective warmth and proper zoning of space. These houses functioned as enormous bioclimatic machines. Every part of the structure was thought out to logical perfection. The secret lay in collective warmth and zoning of space. The longhouse had a frame made of tree trunks tightly bound together, which made it stable in bad weather. On the outside, it was covered with thick layers of elm bark, removed in large rectangular sheets. The bark was an excellent natural insulator that retained heat and kept out the wind. It was lighter than stone, but retained heat better than clay. This material was ideal for the northeastern climate. In addition to thermal insulation, the bark was flexible and could withstand heavy loads. It did not crack in the cold and did not rot quickly in damp conditions. The bark was regularly replaced when it wore out, so the house could last for decades. Thick layers created a kind of multi-layered shell. It worked like a modern insulated wall. This solution came from practice, not theory. Inside the house, along the central passageway, there was a row of hearths. Each hearth heated two families living opposite each other. The smoke rose, forming a warm layer that slowly spread throughout the house. But the most interesting thing happened in the sleeping quarters. Wide platforms were built along the walls, raised half a meter to a meter above the ground. This was not just for convenience, but a means of survival. These platforms made the house look like a multi-level structure. It was always warmer on the upper levels than on the lower ones. People could sit on the platform, work, rest, or sleep, while remaining in the warm air zone. Children often spent most of the winter there. The space under the platforms was used very efficiently. It served as both a storage room and a barrier against the cold. This elevation was critically important. Cold air always sank down, accumulating near the earthen floor. By sleeping on the raised platform, people were in a warmer area. The space under the bunks was used to store firewood, baskets, tools, and supplies. All of this created an additional buffer, reducing heat loss. This system worked year after year, almost unchanged. It was created by nature and refined by observation. The Iroquois knew how important it was to keep the heat inside each part of the house. Therefore, sleeping areas were often covered with skins or woven mats. These curtains turned sleeping areas into small rooms. The volume of air inside such a section was small and quickly heated up from the warmth of human bodies. This created comfort even in the most severe frosts. The small rooms were warm oases inside the huge hall. Such curtains also provided privacy. In a large house where relatives, neighbors, and friends lived, everyone had their own small territory. Families could regulate the heat by raising or lowering the canopy. This allowed them to feel not only protected from the cold, but also respected in their personal space. Each family took care of their own corner, and together they created a warm home. Sleeping together was the norm and a necessity. In winter, families slept in tight groups, keeping each other warm. Heat exchange between people is the most effective way to stay warm, especially at night. In a long house where 50 to 100 people could live, The combined heat of their bodies created a significant rise in temperature. The difference between the cold outside and the warmth inside the house could reach tens of degrees. People became a living source of heat. Such collective living strengthened social ties. Children grew up alongside their grandmothers, uncles, and cousins. Families shared their cares and joys. The communal house not only provided warmth, but also united the family. Traditions were born and stories were preserved within this space. The warmth was not only physical, but also emotional. The roof of the Longhouse did not have a chimney in the usual sense. Instead, smoke escaped through openings in the roof. These were located along the center line of the house. They could be opened or closed with a piece of bark suspended on long poles. This allowed the airflow to be regulated. The warm layer of smoke kept the heat inside, preventing it from escaping immediately. This ventilation method was ingeniously simple. It allowed excess smoke to be removed, but left some of the warm air under the roof. When the weather became particularly harsh, the openings were closed more tightly. If there were many hearths, they were opened slightly to prevent a stuffy atmosphere. The smoke became part of the heating system. It created a soft, warm layer under the ceiling. In the harshest winters, the walls were additionally insulated from the inside with woven reed mats. The air gap between the bark and the mat worked in the same way as in a teepee. It insulated the living space from the frozen outer shell. Reed was a light, durable, and inexpensive material. It was easy to replace if it got damaged. Thanks to this layer, the house became even warmer. The mats made the house more comfortable and protected it from the wind. They softened internal noises and created a pleasant microclimate. In severe frost, people could add additional layers. Thus, insulation was flexible and adaptable to the realities of winter. This made the Longhouse incredibly adaptable. It seemed like a living organism that regulated its own heat. Life in a Longhouse required a high level of social organization. Maintaining the fire was a constant task that was distributed equally. Firewood was prepared in advance, and everyone knew when it was their turn. Families coordinated the use of hearths so that smoke would not bother their neighbors. The distribution of space was also subject to established rules. This created order and prevented conflicts. This organization made the Longhouse more than just a building. It was a social system where everyone played their part. During the harsh months, mutual assistance was a necessity. The house united people into a single community, and it was this unity that allowed the Iroquois to survive in a climate where snow lay for 6 months of the year. Architecture and society were inextricably linked. It was a system where architecture and social structure worked as one to preserve life. People used natural principles to create a warm and sustainable home. The Longhouse was proof of how deeply indigenous peoples understood the world around them. Their knowledge compensated for the lack of technology and tools. Every element of the structure was part of a collective wisdom, and this wisdom saved the lives of many generations. But what if there is no bark, no large number of people, and only snow around? In the next chapter, you will learn how cold snow can be the best blanket. For most of us, snow is a symbol of cold. But for the indigenous peoples of the subarctic and northern plains, it was a building material with excellent thermal insulation properties. Freshly fallen snow is 90–95% air trapped between ice crystals. And air, as we already know, is the best insulator. When heavy snowstorms and frost began, the inhabitants of the plains used snow to insulate their teepees from the outside. They piled snow around the base of their dwellings, compacting it. This snow barrier closed the gaps between the skins and the ground, cutting off the ground wind. The higher the snowdrift around the dwelling, the warmer it became inside. Some northern tribes, such as the Cree, built temporary shelters in winter that were half snow and half branches. The snow acted as a blanket, trapping heat inside the structure. It was important to understand the structure of snow. Too dense, compacted ice conducts cold, while fluffy snow retains heat. The Indians knew which snow to use for insulation and which was better left untouched. Inside such snow-covered dwellings, the temperature could remain around 0 degrees or slightly above, even if it was -40 outside. This was enough to survive with warm clothes and hot food. 0 degrees is a resort compared to the deadly cold of the steppe. In forested areas, hunters caught in bad weather could build a temporary shelter by burying themselves in a snowdrift under the branches of a low spruce tree. Body heat warmed a small cavity in the snow, and the walls of this den began to thaw slightly, then froze, forming an ice crust that retained heat even better. However, the use of snow required caution. It was important to prevent the snow inside from melting and wetting clothes. Therefore, ventilation was essential, even if it meant losing some of the precious heat. The experience of the northern peoples taught the inhabitants of the plains not to fear snow, but to use it. They saw snowdrifts not as an obstacle, but as free insulation that nature generously provided every winter. This technique of insulating with snow was later adopted by many polar explorers and survivalists. It proves that there are no bad materials in nature, only a lack of skill in using them. Using snow was an effective but temporary solution. However, there were tribes that built houses that could withstand any winter thanks to their mass. Are you ready for the shocking truth that some nomadic Native Americans did not live in tents at all? On the banks of the Missouri River, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes built monumental earthen houses that were true masterpieces of bioclimatic architecture. These structures amaze Europeans who considered Native Americans to be exclusively nomadic. But these peoples combined seasonal mobility with a sedentary life in fortified villages. Their houses could accommodate up to 40 people and even horses, and in winter, they were so warm that you could walk around in light clothing. Such dwellings completely refuted the stereotype of the simplicity of Native American life. They were complex engineering structures, created without blueprints, but with a deep understanding of the climate and materials. Every detail served a specific purpose. People built these houses for centuries, improving their design from generation to generation. The architecture was practical, durable, and well thought out. That is why it amazes modern researchers so much. An earthen house was a dome-shaped structure made of thick logs covered with a thick layer of earth and turf. The dome resembled a giant anthill or hill. The walls could be up to half a meter thick or more, which made the house resistant to any winds. The earthen shell was bound together by grass roots, which increased its strength. This allowed the house to stand for decades, even in harsh climates. The structure was not affected by rain or frost. This combination of wood and earth produced amazing results. The earth absorbed moisture, but did not allow it to penetrate the dwelling. The log frame withstood the pressure of the soil, creating a reliable foundation. The walls gradually compacted, becoming stronger and stronger. The house seemed to mature over the years and become even more stable. It was natural engineering in its purest form. The earth smoothed out temperature fluctuations. In summer, such a house was cool like a deep cellar and provided shelter from the heat. In winter, the earthen walls slowly released the heat accumulated over the summer and did not freeze through. Even in severe frosts, a stable microclimate was maintained inside. This was the principle of geothermal heating in action. People used a natural heat battery. The thermal inertia of the walls provided another advantage. The house did not react to sudden changes in the weather. If there was a sharp drop in temperature outside, almost nothing changed inside. People felt protected from the vagaries of the climate. The warmth and coolness seemed natural, not artificially created. Such a dwelling was almost a living being, storing heat in its layers. The entrance to an earthen house was always equipped with a long corridor vestibule. This tunnel protected from the wind and kept the cold air outside. The vestibule was covered with skins at both ends and functioned as an airlock. When someone entered, the cold was trapped in the corridor. The main room remained warm. This solution saved lives in winter. The vestibule was also used as a place to store tools and outerwear. It protected them from snow and ice. Sometimes dogs slept there, warming the room with their breath. On dark nights, the vestibule served as a buffer zone between people and the weather. It was the first line of defense for the house, and it worked flawlessly. In the center was a hearth around which life revolved. Smoke from it escaped through an opening at the top of the dome. Thanks to the excellent insulation of the earthen walls, the heat from one small hearth was enough to heat a huge room with a diameter of 15 to 20 meters. Heat loss was minimal due to the shape of the dome. Warm air rose and then slowly cooled, spreading evenly throughout the room. The house became a natural heater. This central hearth was not only a source of heat, but also a symbol of the domestic community. Around it, people cooked food, socialized, and performed rituals. The hearth connected all the inhabitants of the house, creating a sense of unity. It was small in size, but its influence on family life was enormous. It was the heart of the home. Comfort and safety depended on it. Earthen houses often kept their best horses in winter. This was done not only to protect valuable animals from the cold and theft. The bodies of large animals give off a huge amount of heat, acting as living batteries. Horses warmed the air and maintained a stable temperature. This coexistence benefited everyone. In this way, animals became part of the home ecosystem. Keeping horses inside the house also helped in case of sudden enemy raids. The animals were close at hand, and they could be used to quickly escape or fight back. This increased the family's mobility even in winter. Horses stayed healthy and strong away from the cold. Their breath created extra humidity, which softened the dry winter air. This clever use of animals shows the wisdom of the builders. Along the walls were sleeping places, which often had their own canopies and curtains. This allowed each family to have their own space. The curtains created comfort and protected from drafts. Several families could live in large houses, and each had a small private corner. This helped to maintain order and warmth. The microclimate inside was stable and comfortable. Such sleeping areas also allowed for the conservation of body heat. Even a small curtain kept the heat inside the small space. Children and adults slept in groups, which helped to keep warm in winter. This made the huge house even more efficient. Inside, there was silence and soft twilight. It was a comfortable place to rest after a hard day. The roof of the earthen house was so sturdy that people often sat on it on sunny winter days. The layer of earth could support the weight of several people. The snow that fell was not cleared away because it served as an additional layer of insulation. Its dense structure protected the house from the wind. This increased the heat capacity of the entire structure. The house became even warmer and more protected. However, building such a house required enormous effort and collective labor. Every stage, from cutting down trees to laying turf, was carried out by the entire community. It was a test that strengthened social bonds. The work could take months, and people worked side by side. As a result, the house became a shared achievement, and everyone felt a sense of belonging. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans designed their beds to keep warm, even without earthen walls. We often think of a bed as just a soft place to sleep, but for Native Americans, it was a complex, multi-layered life support system. Sleeping on just a skin thrown on the ground in winter would be a fatal mistake. The ground, even inside a teepee, quickly draws heat away through a process called conduction, and a person cools down much faster than in cold air. Therefore, the approach to organizing a sleeping place was thought out to the smallest detail. Every detail mattered and could be the difference between comfort and danger. The bed was an important part of survival. The Indians understood that the night cold was their most insidious enemy. Even with a good fire, the temperature inside the teepee could drop significantly towards morning. Therefore, protection from the ground became a priority. People learned to observe nature and its laws of heat transfer long before scientific terms appeared. Their solutions were accurate and rational. They did everything to minimize heat loss at night. The first layer of this system was insulation from the ground. The Indians wove special mats from willow twigs. Willow is a flexible and accessible material that grows near water bodies. The twigs were tied together so that there were air gaps between them. These gaps made the mat not only elastic but also warm. The air became a natural insulator. Such mats were quick to make but could last a long time. They could be easily rolled up and carried, which was important for nomadic peoples. Willow branches did not rot quickly and tolerated changes in humidity well. They retained their shape even after prolonged use. This made the mat a convenient and reliable part of everyday life. It was the basis of the entire sleeping system. This hard mat was laid on the ground. It created an air gap and raised the sleeper above the level of humidity. If condensation or meltwater appeared on the floor, it passed through the rods, leaving the bed dry. Dryness was vital because damp cold intensified many times over. On a dry surface, the body lost less heat. Therefore, the mat became the first line of defense. The Indians knew that moisture was the main enemy of warmth. Therefore, the materials for the bottom layer were always chosen so that they did not retain water. Sometimes the mats were made thicker for particularly cold regions. They raised the body above ground level, creating an additional barrier. Over time, these mats became part of tradition. They were valued as much as good skins. A thick layer of dry grass, reeds, or old skins with coarse fur was placed on top of the willow mat. It was a kind of mattress that provided softness and additional insulation. Grass is an excellent insulator, as its hollow stems contain air. Reeds also retained heat well and did not absorb moisture. This layer provided comfort even in severe frosts. It was pleasant to lie on. The thick grass flooring served as both a pillow and insulation. It could be renewed by replacing old grass with fresh grass. Unlike skins, grass was an affordable material that was easy to obtain. It dried quickly and retained its elasticity for a long time. The combination of grass and skins made the bed soft and dry. This created a system that could withstand any frost. Only then were warm bison robes laid out with the fur facing up. These robes were the main source of warmth at night. The fur reliably retained heat and created a comfortable microclimate around the body. The sleeping places themselves were often located along the walls behind the inner lining. Thanks to the air circulation in the Tipis, it was warmest there. This place protected from drafts from the entrance flap. The sleeping area was carefully positioned to create the warmest zone. The air near the wall was heated by the fire, slowly rose and collected in an insulated pocket. This provided a constant temperature throughout the night. Closer to the center of the teepee, it was warmer, but there were also more drafts. Therefore, the side near the walls was the ideal compromise. This is how a natural thermal zone was formed. Leather bags filled with soft cattail down, wool, or dry grass were used as pillows. These materials were light, warm, and did not absorb moisture. Sometimes saddles covered with fur were used if space needed to be saved. The saddle was comfortable and durable, allowing you to get up quickly in case of alarm. This is especially important for hunters who are used to acting instantly. Pillows served as both supports and insulation. The material for pillows was chosen so that it would retain its shape and be sufficiently flexible. Children often used small bags of wool, which were easy to carry. Soft pillows made sleep deeper and more peaceful. They protected the head from the cold air that accumulated closer to the floor. Therefore, the right pillow was part of the cold protection system, and the Indians understood this perfectly well. Some tribes used raised beds made of poles, similar to those found in longhouses. This completely eliminated contact with the cold ground. The bed raised the sleeper several dozen centimeters, where the air was warmer. In addition, the space under the bed served as a place to store things. These things also provided additional insulation. The beds made sleeping safer. These structures resembled modern camping cots. They were light and durable, but required skill to assemble. The poles were selected precisely to size so that they could support a person's weight. Sometimes the beds were made to span the entire width of the teepee so that the whole family could fit on them. This created a common warm area. Such solutions were often used by northern tribes. Warmth is not only what you cover yourself with on the outside, but also what burns inside you. The Indians understood perfectly well the connection between nutrition and the ability to withstand the cold. The winter diet of the indigenous peoples of the plains was radically different from the summer diet and was aimed at generating maximum energy. The basis of the winter diet was pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried, ground bison meat and melted fat, sometimes with the addition of berries. Fat is the most caloric fuel for the body. Eating a piece of pemmican or fatty soup before bed was common practice on cold nights. Digesting fat is a slow process that releases energy and heat over a long period of time. It worked like an internal stove, warming a person from the inside while they slept. Native Americans also knew how to adapt physiologically. From childhood, they were hardened and accustomed to temperature changes. Their metabolism switched to winter mode, allowing them to retain heat more efficiently in their limbs by constricting blood vessels and other mechanisms. There were also special breathing techniques. You had to know how to sleep with your head under the blanket. You had to create a small opening for fresh air to flow in, but in such a way as not to let the heat escape. Proper, calm breathing helped slow the heart rate and conserve the body's resources. An important element was the activity regime. Life slowed down in winter. People spent more time in their homes, repairing clothes and making tools. Unnecessary expenditure of energy in the cold was not encouraged. Water balance also played a role. A dehydrated body freezes faster, blood thickens and circulates less efficiently. Despite the difficulty of obtaining water from snow and ice, drinking hot herbal teas was essential. A state of calm and the ability to relax help to conserve heat. Muscle tension and shivering consume energy. An experienced warrior or hunter knew how to enter a state of deep relaxation, similar to a light trance, to wait out the cold. This heat diet was no less important than the walls of the teepee. Without sufficient fat and calories, no amount of skins would have saved them from exhaustion and freezing. Thus, survival was a complex approach. Engineering solutions were combined with a deep understanding of the biology of one's own body. At night, in severe frosts, Native Americans rarely undressed completely. Their clothing was designed to be comfortable for both active movement and sleep. Traditional deerskin suede clothing was soft, breathable, and did not restrict movement. The main secret to keeping feet warm was moccasins. In winter, they were made larger so that insulation could be placed inside. Soft, dry grass or bison wool was most often used. The grass created an air layer around the foot and absorbed moisture. If your feet were cold, you couldn't sleep. Therefore, drying moccasins and replacing the grass insoles was a mandatory evening procedure. Sleeping in damp shoes was unacceptable. Leather leggings, leg warmers, and shirts were often left on. Layering clothing allowed for temperature regulation. The air between the body and clothing, as well as between layers of clothing, served as additional insulation. Winter clothing often had fur trim or was completely lined with fur. Fur turned inward, toward the body, provided the best warmth. Beaver or otter fur collars protected the neck and face from drafts during sleep. Clothing should not be tight. Tight clothing constricts blood vessels and impairs circulation, leading to rapid cooling. Native American clothing was loose and baggy, which was ideal for retaining heat. Belts and ties allowed the clothing to be sealed so that warm air would not escape. Before bedtime, belts could be loosened to improve blood flow, but they were not removed completely in order to maintain the thermal cocoon. For small children, there were special fur jumpsuits in which they slept. These sleeping bags were often stuffed with dry moss, which served as an excellent absorbent and insulator. Knowing how to care for clothing was a vital skill. Any hole or tear had to be immediately sewn up with sinew to prevent precious heat from escaping. Clothing was not just fabric, it was a personal, mobile habitat that protected a person 24 hours a day. All of the methods described did not work separately, but as a single well-oiled system. Survival depended on discipline and attention to detail. One of the main tasks was managing fire, if it was used in the dwelling at all. At night, the fire was not left burning brightly. It was wasteful and dangerous. The coals were preserved. They were raked into a tight pile and covered with a layer of ash. The ash limited oxygen access, and the coals smoldered slowly throughout the night, giving off gentle heat. The first thing to do in the morning was to fan these coals. The first to wake up, usually women, added kindling and fanned the fire to warm the teepee by the time the others woke up. This required skill to avoid filling the room with smoke. The Indians knew how to predict the weather by the behavior of animals, the color of the sunset, and the movement of smoke. If a storm was expected, preparations began in advance. The stakes of the teepee were reinforced, additional firewood and stones were gathered, and food supplies were checked. In critical situations, when the frost was extreme, people stayed awake all night, taking turns by the fire and keeping each other awake with stories. Sleep in such conditions could turn into eternal sleep from hypothermia. Dogs played an important role. They were often allowed into the teepee, where they slept next to people, acting as living hot water bottles. It was a symbiotic relationship. The dogs got shelter, and the people got extra warmth. The entire culture of daily life was permeated with the idea of conserving energy. Smooth movements, no fuss, compact storage of belongings. Everything worked to minimize heat loss. The transfer of knowledge from the elderly to the young ensured the survival of the tribe. From an early age, children were taught how to choose a place to sleep, how to dry moccasins, and how not to freeze alone. These skills, honed over centuries, command respect even today. They show that humans can live in harmony even with the harshest nature if they understand its laws and do not try to fight it with brute force. It was this combination of technology, biology, and psychology that made the indigenous peoples the true masters of the Great Plains, able to thrive where others saw only a white, icy desert. We have seen that the primitive way of life of the Indians was in fact the pinnacle of adaptation and ingenuity. Every detail, from the construction of the teepee to the tanning of hides, was the result of thousands of years of trial and error, ingenious guesswork, and a deep understanding of nature. They did not just survive, they lived full lives in conditions that seem unbearable to modern humans. Their experience teaches us that warmth is not just a battery or a fire. It is the ability to use the properties of materials, the landscape, and the resources of one's own body. It is the science of how to make even snow and icy winds your allies. What other aspects of the lives of the indigenous peoples of North America interest you? Would you like to learn how they preserve food without refrigerators, or how they navigated the endless steppe without a compass? Write your suggestions in the comments, and perhaps your topic will become the basis for the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.